The following program was provided by an independent producer solely responsible for its content. The opinions expressed do not necessarily represent the views of this station, its staff, board of directors, or underwriters.
Hello and welcome to Perspectives. My name is David Schoneman and I'm your host on this program. On Perspectives, we take a look at a variety of issues that are important to folks here in Nashua and really throughout the state as we consider policy questions that affect our day-to-day lives. Today we're going to take a look at a very important sector in the New Hampshire economy, and that's the manufacturing sector, particularly high-tech manufacturing, which is centralized right here in the southern tier, Nashua and further to the southwest. With me today to talk about that is Mr. Marc Vatter, who is an economist based right here in Nashua. Marc is a member of the International Association of Energy Economics, the Northeast Energy and Commerce Association, the New Hampshire Business and Industry Association, the American Economic Association, the Association of Christian Economists, and the National Republican City Committee. Marc, thank you very much for coming in.
Thanks, David. Thanks for having me.
You certainly have a lot of qualifications. I'm glad to know you're based here in Nashua because we have a lot of issues here. Much of the state's economy is centered around Nashua, and it's nice to have some local experts. So I really appreciate you coming in.
Yeah, it's my pleasure.
So let's talk a little bit about this very important sector in the economy. That's this focus on manufacturing. Where does manufacturing sit in terms of overall value to the state?
Right. Manufacturing is the largest economic sector in New Hampshire, and it is, as you say, mostly high-end, high-tech manufacturing. Sometimes it's referred to as SMHT, smart manufacturing and high technology. And the jobs in SMHT pay well, and they do a lot to stimulate jobs beyond manufacturing. So this is really the engine that drives the state's economy more so than tourism, although there are regional differences. As you say, the manufacturing sector is located or concentrated in the southwest in Hillsborough, Cheshire, and Sullivan counties, whereas tourism is more concentrated in the north.
I think all that is very interesting because when I talk to folks about the economy in New Hampshire, most people are always going right to tourism. And tourism, it's valuable, certainly, as you say, regionally. But when we talk about making money or growing an economy, tourism is more service oriented, and manufacturing is actually making something, and there's more money made basically to an economy when we actually take something out of the ground, essentially manipulate it and create a product that we then sell.
Well, the wages in manufacturing are much higher than they are in tourism, and that gives the sector a lot of oomph when we're talking about stimulating employment in secondary industries. Now, despite the fact that manufacturing is our largest sector, we have seen declines in manufacturing employment in the last few decades. So since 1990, manufacturing employment has gone from about 100,000 to 70,000 in New Hampshire.
70,000 employees throughout the state, from about 100,000. Is that based on overall economic decline? I mean, we're here in 2018, we've got a booming national economy, we've got a booming New Hampshire state economy under Chris Sununu's leadership, and now we see that perhaps the job levels are down a little bit, but...
Well, this is a more long-term, but the biggest declines came during the last two recessions. Interestingly, the largest decline came during the recession in 2001, whereas a smaller decline happened in the Great Recession.
I see. So let's talk a little bit about some of the challenges that are facing the manufacturing industry here in New Hampshire. What can we do? Running for state senate, I'm very interested in growing our economy, and I'm certainly very interested in the manufacturing aspect. So what are the issues that as a state senator in the coming term we could work on to make things a little better for these folks?
Sure, we want to have good jobs and we want to have good paying jobs, and manufacturing does that. I think later on we'll talk a little bit about the big picture, because manufacturing is something that participates in global markets, and there's a lot of action going on there right now. But we'll revisit that later. First, I want to start by talking about some of the local issues related to manufacturing. And manufacturers, I want to focus on a few things. Manufacturers have concerns about policies related to energy, healthcare, and international trade. And we'll start with energy and healthcare.
Okay.
In energy, the Business and Industry Association is a lobbying group, and they lobby on behalf of manufacturers in Concord. And they have expressed support for a net metering policy that doesn't shift costs. Now, let me talk about what net metering is for a second. Net metering is when a retail electric customer has some kind of generator, like a solar panel, and sells electricity back to the utility. Now, they would, if they in any given month bought more electricity than they generated, they would still pay a bill. But if they generated more than they bought, I should say enough more than they bought, then they would be paid by the utility.
I see.
So they have two separate meters, one for the load and one for the generation. And but when we get to this problem of cost shifting, the way they're compensated doesn't distinguish between times when energy is expensive and when it's inexpensive. And so a customer who generates when energy is inexpensive still receives the full retail rate, which is set to cover the full cost of their load, and in exchange for what they generate. So that person who generates when energy is cheap is going to be getting a subsidy.
For instance, if they have some kind of system that generates power during the night.
Right, hypothetically.
Hypothetically.
Yeah, something that generated power during the night when energy was cheap would be receiving a subsidy because they'd be paid the same for the energy that they generated as someone who generated during weekday afternoons when the price of energy is higher. I mean, there are some decisions that are in the hands of these generators and some that are not, but in government, we don't have to control everything that people do. We just have to send the right message and let people work it out and be creative.
Right.
So, now Governor Sununu vetoed Senate Bill 446 in June.
What was that?
446 would have raised the maximum size of a net meter generator from 1 megawatt to 5 megawatts.
Okay. How much is a megawatt? What are we talking about in terms of size?
A megawatt's about I think a household will consume a megawatt hour in a month. A good-sized household.
Okay. All right, so we're going up. All right, so 5 is 5 times the amount, and it's a fairly large-sized plant.
Let me put it this way. Mine Falls Dam is 1.3 megawatts.
Okay.
Okay.
All right.
For a local reference point.
Okay, that's good.
Now.
So the Senate bill that was vetoed.
Yes.
Let's talk about that. What would that have done?
It would have raised the maximum size of a generator. So right now, generators up to 1 megawatt can be net metered and receive the retail rate instead of the wholesale price for what they generate.
Okay.
And that's a big difference. The wholesale price is a lot lower than the retail rate.
I see.
Now there are costs that are added to wholesale electricity for transmission and distribution. And some load imposes those costs and some load doesn't, and that's the problem. Okay, so now the governor vetoed SB 446 because of this kind of cost shifting, where customers who were generating when electricity was cheap were getting a subsidy at the expense of customers, of really all customers, including those who were generating when energy was pricier.
So net metering, the fact that we have it in the state and that some folks could be generating electricity at night will affect the homeowner's bill, for instance, at some level.
Yes,
Okay,
certainly.
so we're paying that subsidy. That would come from ratepayers, and Governor Sununu wanted to prevent that cost shifting, maybe save the cost, the ratepayers, which would affect businesses and homeowners.
Everybody.
Okay.
But since our focus is on manufacturing, in particular, manufacturers have expressed an interest in not seeing this kind of cost shifting take place. And so now, once again, the cost of load includes electric commodity, and it also includes transmission costs and distribution costs, and they're all built into this kilowatt hour rate that people pay, and the per kilowatt hour rate that's paid to net metered customers for what they generate.
Okay.
What I recommend as a net metering policy or rate design that would prevent cost shifting and also help to minimize costs of serving load overall, especially transmission costs, would be in the first place time of use energy rates.
Okay.
So these rates would vary according to the time of the day.
So right now, my electric bill does not distinguish between when I'm using electricity.
That's right.
I see. So if we were to have bills that did distinguish, then the net metering aspect would follow that.
Well, no, actually, I'm proposing something more modest.
Okay.
I'm just talking about doing it for net metered customers.
Okay. Okay.
Right? So the typical customer. I mean, time of use rates for everybody might be a good step, but I think we should take it
Sounds good.
incrementally.
I like incremental.
Yes. That'll give us a way to see how well it works with this minority of customers who are taking a step out and being producers as well as consumers, and so they're getting more deeply involved in what is actually a pretty complex system in the New England grid. But we don't want to make it any more complicated than we have to. But I think distinguishing the price they receive for what they generate by time of day is a modest enough increase in complexity that people should be able to live with it. And in order to avoid cost shifting, I don't think we should expect customers and manufacturers in particular to be subsidizing people who are net metered customers. So
I fully agree.
now California has already started applying time of use rates for net metered customers as part of its net energy metering 2.0 is what they call it there.
Okay.
So there's precedent for this. It's not a radical idea.
Can I ask a question from a technological perspective?
Yeah.
Is it difficult to gather that data?
I don't think
do the meters.
I don't think
shouldn't need
information
new-
gathering is difficult in any part of our economy anymore.
Okay. So it's not going to require different meters, reinstallation of all kinds of equipment.
It would require some other equipment, but that kind of equipment I don't think would be terribly expensive.
Okay. So we can accomplish this at relatively low cost theoretically.
Right. Certainly,
Okay.
it's already being done.
Okay. Good. Good.
Right, in California. So let's have a look at this graph. So what you see there is the energy price in Nashua on September 12th. Okay. And clearly it's lowest at night. But
So I don't understand the graph here.
okay, I'm sorry. Yes, you have the price of energy on the vertical axis and the hour of the day on the horizontal axis.
All
and
right,
that goes
so
from
from
1
midnight
to 24.
to 24-hour clock. Okay,
Yeah.
so we see that it peaks around 8 o'clock at night, 20.
Right, and it's high in the late afternoon. There's a little dip there at lunchtime and a big dip in the early morning hours when people are sleeping.
Okay.
Okay, so the price is largely load driven, but it's not the same thing.
Okay.
So let's be clear. The value of energy is measured by the price, which is closely dependent on load, highly dependent on load.
So where would you propose maybe making the change on, at the time of day? Would it be 4 segments or just 2 segments? What would you think?
Well, you can. In California, they have, I think, 3 or 4.
Okay.
Okay, and we could do something similar, but I think you'd want to distinguish that high peak in the late evening from the midday section, the shoulder, what you'd call a shoulder period, and from the deep off-peak period at night.
Okay.
Now one example, and it's only one example, of what a net metered customer could do if they were being paid a time differentiated rate would be to install solar panels that kind of face to the west. Now, if you think about the sun, right, it's not drawn on this graph, but the sun's rays are at their highest at midday when you see that little dip in the lunchtime dip in the price of electricity. But if you face your solar panels to the south, they're going to collect the most electricity. But if you face your solar panels to the west, you're going to collect electricity when it's most expensive. And so that's the kind of efficiency that you can capture by offering time of use rates.
Interesting.
And you won't see costs shifted from one customer to another.
Okay.
But people will be compensated more accurately for what they produce.
Has this been discussed up in Concord, to the best of your knowledge, this proposal?
No.
Okay.
But it's been done.
It's been done elsewhere.
It's being done in California.
Yes,
and
yes.
California tends to be a leader in energy policy, so but there's no particular reason why we should be too far behind.
I would agree with that. I think that it sounds like a good idea, certainly one that's worth exploring. I believe Senator Avard was chair of the Energy Committee in Concord.
Right. Now,
And,
yes.
and so I know you've spoken with him, you'll be speaking with him again. This might be something that we can work on in the next term to bring some legislation forward that would make this happen.
I'd be very supportive.
Good. Glad to hear it.
I want to talk about a related issue.
Okay.
Now, but I want to give a little more background.
Okay.
Before I do that, the New England Independent System Operator operates the transmission grid and wholesale markets for electricity in New England.
Okay.
And the transmission system is built to meet network peak load. Our utility, my utility, Eversource, is billed on its contribution to local area network peak load. So there are 3 local area networks in New Hampshire. One is Eversource, the other is National Grid, and the third is New Hampshire Transmission.
Are those regional?
They're what you would call sub-regional. So there's a New Hampshire reliability region, and then local area networks within that region.
Okay.
And the utility is billed for transmission on the basis of its contribution to local area transmission network peak load on a monthly basis. So briefly, monthly peak load.
Okay.
And so another feature of net metering rate design, which I think we need, which has less precedent, because they're not doing this in California, is applying demand credits. So I think we should be crediting net metered customers for their generation at the time of network peak load. And the reason why we should do this, and because this is an added complexity to rate design, but we have exceptionally high transmission costs in New England, higher than any other region of the country. I'd like to look at the next graph. So what you see here, this is from an article by Dave Solomon in the Union Leader. It was written a couple years ago, but it's a very nice comparison of electricity costs across region.
Okay, what are we seeing in the graph?
Yeah, what you see on the left is several years worth of electricity costs in New England, and then that's ISO-NE. And then the next group is CAISO, or the California Independent System Operator. The third group is the Mid-Continent Independent System Operator, formerly the Midwest Independent System Operator. The fourth group is the New York Independent System Operator, and the fifth group is Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and Maryland, that regional transmission organization.
So the graph, the 5 columns in the leftmost section are higher than anybody's, and so that's our total cost of electricity.
That's right. And but take a look at the components. Take a look at the breakdown. The purple part of each bar is transmission. And you can see that it's twice as high in New England as it is in Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and Maryland, and it's far more than twice as high than it is in California, in the Midwest, or in New York.
I see.
We have exceptionally high transmission costs, and I want to say a couple of things about this, but the first thing I want to say is that we need to be reflecting these costs in our net metering rate design.
Okay.
Now, Senator Avard once told me that his intent in sponsoring Senate Bill 446 was to save transmission costs. And the appropriate way to reward a net metered customer or to charge them for their load is through a demand credit or a demand charge.
Okay.
And essentially, we need this. And I haven't heard much discussion in Concord about this, but this would be sort of an economist's or a rate analyst's solution to the cost shifting problem. Reward people for the costs that they defray, charge people for the costs that they impose, and you're going to both avoid cost shifting and minimize transmission costs overall.
So what you're talking about is kind of a two-fronted approach.
Time of use rates.
Time of use rates.
And demand credits or charges.
Which affects the transmission cost.
And we'll just do it with the net metered customers because they're bigger and they have a little more responsiveness to price signals than most people do anyway.
Okay. All that sounds good, and certainly manufacturers locally here in New Hampshire would benefit because they're the ones who tend to be subsidizing these electrical producers, and we need less expensive energy in order to facilitate good manufacturing.
You know, it might raise this cost shifting might raise somebody's residential bill by $5, but it could raise a manufacturer's bill by $5,000.
Okay, not the plan that you're proposing. It would bring a reduction, but the cost shifting that we presently have,
and which would have been more intense had we raised the cap on net metering without time differentiating the rates.
I see. Okay.
Time differentiating the rates could make raising the cap on net metering a lot more efficient.
I think there are a lot of folks who like the idea of raising the cap.
Okay.
That would sound good to me too, but you're right. I think we need to work together to find a way to make that increased cap not really an increased subsidy.
Correct.
Okay, that sounds good. What else do we have? We're running out of time here. I just want to make sure we get to the healthcare issue. Now, you mentioned healthcare. Tell me about healthcare.
Do you mind if we just stay on transmission a little longer? I'm an energy guy, and if you don't mind, I'd rather
that's perfectly fine.
I'd rather just spend my time on energy and we can talk about healthcare after you get elected.
Okay, sounds good.
But there's a process going on at the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. Let's have another look at the graph. Those transmission costs, those high transmission costs, have been found by the FERC to be unjust, unreasonable, and unduly discriminatory. And the FERC instituted a proceeding in December of 2015. And New England transmission owners and customers and other interested parties are part of that process. The New Hampshire Office of the Consumer Advocate, headed by Don Crease, intervened in that process. And it is a bit of a black box. We don't know what the settlement's going to look like, but I did get on a listserv and receive an email in June saying that the parties were close to a settlement. Okay. This is kind of an underreported story, but your viewers are going to hear about it first. Okay. Actually, the people who heard about it first were the people who read Dave Solomon's article in the Union Leader soon after the proceeding began. But I wanted to bring it up before we talked about healthcare because it's big. If you look at that graph, you see what a big factor transmission costs are in the high cost of electricity in New England. And when this settlement is reached, one of the things that's going to come out of it is a new dispute resolution process, because one of the criticisms FERC made of the ISO's process was that there was inadequate opportunity for parties to challenge rates and resolve disputes formally and informally. Now, the Office of the Consumer Advocate, as I said, intervened in the FERC process, and if a new dispute resolution process for transmission rates comes out of that, I would expect that the Office of the Consumer Advocate would have something to do challenging transmission rates that FERC has said are unjust. There's also the office, the Council for the Public, which is headed by Chris Aslan, and that office is charged with advocating for business interests, including manufacturing interests. We don't talk about it much, but we really may be in a place after this process is done where we want to look at ways to shift costs of transmission from customers back onto owners.
I see.
Yeah.
So that's another way that we can, so now we have 3 ideas or 3 things that are out there that could help to reduce the overall cost of energy in New Hampshire.
Yep.
We have the FERC ruling, essentially, which will provide some more guidance potentially to how charges are billed, and then the 2 other ideas that you mentioned earlier.
Time of use rates and demand credits.
Okay.
Now, one of the things, just one more point regarding transmission costs. Mike Harrington is a rep in Concord, and he is also a former PUC commissioner. He's knows more about energy than I do, and one of the things that he mentioned was that the rates of return allowed on transmission were upwards of 10%, and that's a relic from a time when interest rates were much.
Yeah, no one gets 10%
higher. People
rate of return.
For a risk-free investment, that's an excellent rate of return, and so that's the kind of thing which we might want to shift back onto transmission owners.
All right, great. Thank you very much. We are out of time now. Mark, do you have anything you want to add in the last 30 seconds here? Where can people reach you?
8 Franklin Street.
What's 8
which
Franklin
is
Street?
Bonhoeffer's Cafe.
Bonhoeffer's Cafe. We've met there a couple of times. I like that place
And you
too.
can look at my website at appliedecon.net.
All right, great. We'll look forward to seeing you at Bonhoeffer's. Thank you very much, Mark, for coming in. We'll have to have you in again sometime.
Thank
And
you.
folks, I want to thank you at home, too, for tuning in. I'm here talking with Mr. Marc Vatter, a local economist here in the city of Nashua, who's been sharing some of his ideas for what we can do to reduce the cost of energy that will help enhance and drive really the largest contributing factor to our economy, which is manufacturing, centered right down here in the southern tier of New Hampshire. Thank you very much for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.
The preceding program was provided by an independent producer solely responsible for its content. The opinions expressed do not necessarily represent the views of this station, its staff, board of directors, or underwriters.